Fix this, and I'll double your mother's salary. Daniel Mercer jabbed his finger at 17-year-old Sophie Hayes like she was something he had stepped over on his way to a more important meeting. The girl stood perfectly still, her worn backpack hanging from one shoulder, her dark eyes moving calmly across 3 screens of financial data that had paralyzed 12 Harvard-trained analysts for 19 days straight. Her mother pressed a mop handle so hard her knuckles turned pale. 42 investors sat in uncomfortable silence. Mercer's smile was the kind that never reaches the eyes. He had absolutely no idea he had just made the most expensive mistake of his entire career. The crisis had begun 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning that started like every other Tuesday at Mercer & Associates, the most prestigious financial consulting firm in Chicago. The lobby gleamed. The coffee was imported. The analysts wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. For 11 years, Mercer & Associates had built its reputation on one promise. We do not make mistakes. That promise died quietly on the 23rd floor at 9:17 in the morning when FarmCor's CEO, James Thornton, called Daniel Mercer directly. "Your revenue model is wrong," Thornton said. His voice was flat and deliberate, the way a man speaks when he is deciding whether to end a relationship. "My internal team ran independent numbers last night. Your projections are inflated by somewhere between 30 and 40%. We're talking about a presentation to our board of directors next Friday. $40 million in investment decisions were made based on your firm's analysis. I need an explanation by end of week, or I'm pulling the contract and calling my lawyers." Mercer hung up the phone and walked to the glass wall of his corner office, overlooking Lake Michigan for a long time without speaking. Then he called in everyone. 12 analysts spread across the 23rd floor conference room for the next 19 days. Dr. Patricia Webb, his lead financial architect, and a woman whose resume included stops at Goldman Sachs, the Federal Reserve, and 2 best-selling textbooks on financial modeling, ran the operation. They rebuilt the model from scratch 3 times. They checked every formula, every assumption, every data input. They brought in outside consultants. They ran the numbers, forward and backward. The projections remained inflated. The error remained invisible. Somewhere inside 140,000 cells of interconnected spreadsheet logic, a mistake was hiding and nobody could find it. By day 19, the room smelled like cold coffee and quiet panic. FarmCor's board presentation was in 4 days. Thornton's lawyers had already sent a preliminary letter. Mercer called a full investor meeting for that Friday afternoon, a last attempt to present progress, and by time 42 people filed into the main conference room: board members, senior partners, FarmCor representatives, and 3 journalists from financial trade publications who had been tipped off that something significant was happening inside the city's most celebrated consulting house. Linda Hayes arrived at 2:45 in the afternoon, 45 minutes before her shift officially began, because the building manager had asked the cleaning staff to prepare the 23rd floor before the meeting started. Linda had worked at Mercer & Associates for 9 years. She knew which partners drank their coffee with cream, which ones needed the recycling emptied twice a day, and which offices to avoid after 8 in the evening when the arguing started. She was 51 years old, wore comfortable shoes, and had raised Sophie alone since Sophie was 4. Sophie had nowhere else to go that afternoon. Her after-school job at the grocery store had ended early because of a broken freezer unit, and Linda had told her to come to the building and wait in the lobby until her shift ended at 7. Sophie took the elevator to 23, sat down in a chair outside the conference room, pulled out her library book, and began reading. She had been reading for perhaps 20 minutes when the voices inside the conference room began to rise. She was not trying to listen. She simply could not avoid it. Dr. Webb's voice, measured but strained. "We have confirmed the error exists. somewhere in the assumption layering sequence, but the interaction between the revenue growth variables and the cost projection stack is creating a feedback loop that we cannot isolate without understanding which input triggered it first. A voice Sophie did not recognize, sharp and impatient. Patricia, we have been hearing this for 3 weeks. We need a solution, not a description of the problem. Sophie set her book down slowly. She had heard that phrase before, not in a boardroom, at the kitchen table, 2 years ago, when she was trying to help her mother understand why their household budget kept showing money they did not actually have. Linda had been adding projected savings back into her available balance before the savings actually cleared, which made the total look larger, which then made the projected savings look achievable, which inflated the total again. A loop, money counting itself before it existed. Sophie stood up, walked to the open conference room door, and looked at the screens. 3 monitors displayed the financial model. She scanned the column headers, the formula references, the conditional logic chains. It took her less than 2 minutes. "Excuse me," she said. 42 heads turned toward a 17-year-old girl in a grocery store. Name tag standing in the doorway of a crisis meeting that had consumed 3 weeks and the reputations of 12 credentialed professionals. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Daniel Mercer laughed. It was not a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that is designed to make a room feel the distance between the person laughing and the person being laughed at. "Who let a kid in here?" He looked at Linda, who had appeared behind Sophie, her hands already reaching for her daughter's arm. "Is this yours?" Linda's face went the particular shade of red that comes not from anger, but from a specific pain of being made to feel small in front of your child. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Mercer." She was just waiting in the hallway. "Sophie, come on, let's go outside." "It's a feedback loop," Sophie said. Her voice did not shake. Mercer tilted his head. His expression shifted from amusement to something closer to performance. He understood that 42 people were watching him, including 3 journalists. He smiled the way people smile when they are about to make an example of someone. "Is that right?" he said. "Not a question. Your revenue growth rate is pulling from the final projected revenue figure to calculate its own percentage increase," Sophie said, stepping forward slightly, addressing the screen rather than Mercer. "But the final revenue figure includes the growth rate that hasn't been calculated yet. So the formula is using an answer to calculate itself. The number keeps growing because it keeps adding a percentage of a number that includes that percentage. It's circular." Patricia Webb had stopped moving. Mercer spread his hands with theatrical patience. "Sweetheart, this is a 140,000 cell financial model built by people with combined graduate degrees from 6 of the top 7 business schools in the country. Do you know what a graduate degree is?" Soft laughter moved through the room. Not everyone laughed, but enough. Sophie looked at Mercer directly. "Do you want me to show you where it is?" Linda stepped forward urgently, her voice a whisper. "Sophie, please." "Yes," said James Thornton. The room went quiet in a different way. Thornton was sitting at the far end of the table. He was 63 years old, had built FarmCore from a 2-person laboratory into a company worth $4 billion, and had not survived 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry by ignoring information because of where it came from. "Let her show us," Thornton said simply. He looked at Mercer with an expression that was not unkind, but was absolutely clear. "We have been in this room for hours already. I am willing to listen to anyone." Mercer's smile tightened at the corners. He gestured toward the screens with an open hand. The gesture said, "Go ahead and embarrass yourself." Sophie walked to the central monitor. She moved the cursor to a column near the middle of the visible range, then scrolled right to a section that had not been on the screen when the analysts were presenting. She pointed to a single cell. "This one," she said. "Cell revenue growth actual, row 47. The formula says it equals the projected total revenue in cell T92, divided by the baseline revenue in cell B12, then multiplied by 100. But cell T92 is the final revenue projection, and that cell contains a formula that already includes the value from revenue growth. Actual row 47. They're each using the other one to calculate themselves. Patricia Webb crossed the room in 5 steps. She bent forward and read the formula. Her face did not change for 3 seconds. Then she reached past Sophie and traced the reference chain with her own finger, following it from cell to cell the way you follow a thread back to where a knot began. Her hand stopped. She straightened up slowly. "Sophie," Patricia said, and her voice had changed entirely. "How old are you?" 17. "Where do you go to school?" "Lincoln Park High School. I'm finishing my junior year." Patricia turned to the room. Her expression was the professional equivalent of a person who has just looked for their keys for 45 minutes and found them in the first place they should have checked. "She's right," Patricia said. The room came apart quietly, the way rooms do when something impossible turns out to be true. Analysts pulled up their own laptops. Phones came out. Rapid typing spread across the table like a wave. 40 seconds later, 3 separate voices confirmed the same finding from different angles. The circular reference had been generating compounding errors across every forward projection in the model. 19 days of expert analysis had circled around a loop that a 17-year-old had identified in under 2 minutes. The performance improvement indicators filled the screen with green almost immediately once the reference was corrected. Farm Core's actual projected revenue, once the loop was broken, came in at 36% below the inflated figure, exactly what Thornton's internal team had estimated. Mercer stood at the front of the room and said nothing for a long moment. Then he recovered. It was impressive in a hollow way. The speed with which a certain kind of person can reframe a humiliation into something that sounds like grace is a skill that takes years of practice. "Well," Mercer said, clapping once. Clearly a fresh set of eyes was what we needed. "Young lady, good catch. Linda, you should be proud." He moved back toward the head of the table with the energy of a man reclaiming territory. "Patricia, let's have the corrected figures distributed before end of day so we can." "Mr. Mercer," Sophie said. Mercer paused. Something in the quality of her voice made the room go still. "Again, there are more," Sophie said. A different kind of silence filled the conference room. Sophie had not left the monitor. She was looking at a different section of the model now, her eyes moving across the columns with the calm, systematic patience of someone reading a language they know fluently. "There is the same problem here in the cost reduction projections. You are calculating the efficiency savings as a percentage of the post-savings cost, not the pre-savings cost. The savings number includes itself." She moved the cursor. "And here, in the market penetration estimates, the new customer growth rate is being calculated against a total addressable market figure that already assumes the new customers are there." Patricia moved to each point Sophie indicated. Each confirmation came faster than the last. 3 more circular logic errors. 3 more places where the model had been counting answers before it calculated them. Thornton stood up from his chair. It was not a dramatic movement. It was simply the movement of a man who has decided something. "How many more?" he asked Sophie directly. "Not Mercer." "Sophie." Sophie studied the screen for 30 seconds. "I don't know yet, but the same kind of mistake is in every section I have looked at. It might be in all of them." Thornton looked at Mercer. His voice was entirely calm. "I want her to check all of them." Mercer's jaw tightened. "James, with all due respect, this is still our proprietary client methodology. We cannot have an unauthorized individual." "She is standing in your conference room," Thornton said, "having just found for errors in 20 minutes that your authorized individuals missed for 19 days. My $40 million is on this table. I want her to check all of it." The room waited. There are moments in a person's life when the gap between who they present themselves to be and who they actually are becomes impossible to maintain. Mercer was standing inside one of those moments, and everyone in the room could see it. Fine, Mercer said. Sophie worked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She did not use complicated tools. She did not run macros or build testing scripts. She moved through the model the way she had learned to check her mother's household budget, section by section, asking one question about each formula. Is this cell using a number that includes itself? It was the simplest possible question. It was the question nobody had thought to ask. She found 11 more errors, 15 circular logic problems in total, scattered across a 140,000 cell model like cracks in a foundation that everyone had been decorating instead of repairing. Each correction shifted the output numbers. By the time Sophie completed the final section, the model's revenue projection had changed by 38% downward. Significant. Serious. True. But that was not the biggest problem. The biggest problem arrived when Patricia Webb, running verification checks on Sophie's work, pulled up the firm's file archive to compare the corrected FarmCore model against 3 previous client deliverables. She was looking for calibration references. She found something else. She sat with the discovery for perhaps 90 seconds before she spoke. And when she did speak, her voice was very careful. Daniel, Patricia said quietly, these errors are not unique to FarmCore. Mercer looked up from his phone. Patricia had pulled 3 other completed client models on her screen side by side. She pointed to a column in the first one, then the same column, position in the second, then the third. The formula structure was identical. Across all 3, the same logical error, the same circular reference design. This is how we build every revenue model, Patricia said. This is the template. This has been the template for at least 6 years. The conference room absorbed that information slowly, the way a building absorbs the first tremor of something structural. Mercer's voice, when it came, was almost inaudible. That's not possible. I helped write the template, Patricia said. She was not defensive. She was precise and honest in a way that people are when they are past the point where anything except honesty is useful. 6 years ago, I built the efficiency logic the same way it was built in the 3 modeling courses I took at business school. I never questioned it because I never had a reason to. She paused, and apparently neither did anyone else. Thornton had been sitting quietly. Now he spoke. How many clients has this template been used with? Patricia opened the archive directory. The number was not a small one. It was not a criminal matter. Nobody had stolen anything. Nobody had lied. Deliberately. What had happened was more ordinary, and in some ways more troubling than deliberate fraud. A flawed method had been taught, learned, trusted, and passed forward without anyone stopping to ask whether the foundation was sound. Prestige had substituted for proof. Credential had replaced curiosity. And because the people using the template were brilliant and credentialed and confident, nobody had questioned it. You do not question. The foundation of a building, you were told, was built by the best architects in the city. It took a 17-year-old girl who had learned budgeting at a kitchen table to ask the question that 6 years of Harvard MBAs had not. Sophie was standing near the window when Mercer finally walked over to her. The room was still active behind them, Patricia and her team already building a corrected template, analysts on phones with other clients, Thornton in a quiet conversation with 2 of his board representatives. Mercer stood beside Sophie for a moment without speaking. He looked out at the Chicago skyline, at the glass towers full of credentialed people building important things on foundations nobody had recently thought to question. When he turned to face her, his expression was not what she expected. It was not the expression of a man performing contrition for an audience. The journalists were across the room. The investors were occupied. Nobody was watching this particular moment except Sophie and, a few feet away, her mother Linda, who had stopped pretending to clean and was simply standing, still, watching her daughter. "I was cruel to you," Mercer said. The words came out flat and direct without decoration, not just dismissive. Cruel. And the cruelty was specific. "I used your age, your mother's job, and the way you were dressed to tell you that. Your voice did not belong in this room. I was wrong about the model, and I was wrong about you. And those are two very different kinds of wrong." Sophie looked at him steadily. She was 17 years old, and she had grown up watching her mother be made invisible in rooms like this one, and she had learned from Linda Hayes the particular discipline of not letting other people's smallness determine the size of your own response. "I know you were wrong about the model," she said. "You can figure out the other part yourself." Mercer nodded once. It was not a small nod. He crossed the room to where Linda Hayes was standing. Linda straightened, almost imperceptibly, the instinctive posture of a person preparing to be dismissed. Mercer stopped in front of her and did not speak immediately. "Mrs. Hayes," he said finally, "I owe you an apology as well. I have worked in this building for 11 years, and I have never once asked your name. I used your daughter tonight the way people use the children of working people everywhere, as a curiosity that could be entertaining for a moment before being sent back to wherever they came from. I am sorry." Linda Hayes looked at the man who ran the most powerful consulting firm in Chicago and said, with complete composure, "My daughter has been solving problems since she was 6 years old. I've just never had a room to bring her to." It was the single most devastating sentence spoken in that conference room all evening. It was not spoken into a microphone or broadcast to millions. It was spoken quietly by a woman in comfortable shoes to a man in a $2,000 suit, and it landed with the weight of 11 years of being looked through. In the weeks that followed, the firm audited every model built on the flawed template and issued corrected reports to each client. 3 clients found meaningful discrepancies in past recommendations. 2 adjusted their capital allocation strategies based on the corrected figures. The regulatory exposure was real but manageable, and the firm's willingness to self-report without waiting to be caught earned them a level of professional credibility that no marketing strategy could have purchased. Patricia Webb redesigned the firm's foundational modeling methodology from the ground up. She built into the new template a simple verification layer that she called the Sophie check, a one-step scan that asked whether any cell was using a number that included itself. It added approximately 4 minutes to any model build. It eliminated the most common class of financial projection error she had ever encountered. James Thornton renewed the Farm Corps contract. The corrected projections, as it turned out, actually painted a more useful picture of the company's growth trajectory than the inflated version had. Accurate information, even when it is smaller, builds better decisions than comfortable information that is quietly wrong. Sophie Hayes received a formal letter from Mercer and Associates 3 weeks later. Inside was a scholarship offer for her full university education in any field she chose, along with a 1-paragraph note from Daniel Mercer that did not mention the money at all. The note said only that he hoped she would choose a field that required her to keep asking the simple questions that experts tend to forget because those questions turn out to be the most important ones. She chose mathematics with a concentration in financial systems, not because of Mercer's letter, because of her mother. Linda Hayes had spent 9 years cleaning floors in buildings where other people's ideas were considered valuable by default, where the cost of admission to the conversation was a credential rather than a contribution. Sophie had watched her mother move through those rooms with a dignity that was never granted and never asked for. Linda had not been waiting for someone to recognize her intelligence. She had been busy using it every day in the real and necessary work of raising a daughter who understood that worth and recognition are 2 entirely different measurements, and only one of them is yours to control. On the evening of Sophie's first day of university orientation, Linda Hayes drove her to campus in their 11-year-old sedan, and helped carry 2 bags. Up to the dormitory room. On the way back down the stairs, Linda stopped on the second-floor landing and looked out the window at the courtyard below, where students were moving in every direction with the particular energy of people standing at the beginning of something. "Mom," Sophie said, "you know this is yours too. Everything I figure out up here, you figure out first in ways that don't have names." Linda Hayes did not say anything for a moment. Then she straightened, adjusted her jacket, and started back down the stairs. "I know," she said simply. "Now go figure out something they haven't thought of yet. Some lessons are taught in lecture halls with proper credentials and approved curricula. Some lessons are taught at kitchen tables by women who never got the room they deserved, who raised their children anyway with a full quiet conviction that a voice does not need permission to be true." The most important question Daniel Mercer's firm had failed to ask for 6 years was not a technical question. It was not about formulas or reference, chains or circular logic in a spreadsheet. It was the question of whether the people they had never thought to listen to might be the ones worth hearing most. Sophie Hayes had walked into a room of 42 people with a grocery store, name tag and a library book and no invitation, and she had asked the one question nobody else had thought to ask. Not because she was exceptional, because nobody had told her the question wasn't hers to ask. That is the only kind of courage that changes anything. Not the courage that waits until it is certain it belongs. The courage that asks anyway. The courage that walks through the door before it is open, because the problem on the other side does not care who trained you. It only cares whether you can see it clearly. Linda Hayes had been teaching her daughter that lesson since she was 4 years old. She had just never had a boardroom to teach it in. Now she did, and the room, for once, was listening. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.